what you want, when you want it, where you want it. This is The Mesh.
Brothers in Tech is a weekly podcast focused on personal and home technology, helping provide you, our fellow brothers and sisters in tech, with some information, assistance, and recommendations. Hi, everybody. This is Alan Jackson. Brian Jackson over to my left. It switched sides on us, Brian. I think beforehand I was on the left, you were on the right. Now I'm super confused.
No, I think the system seems to have prioritized certain people now and kind of moved me up to the first seat. So hello everyone. Welcome to Brothers in Tech.
It listened to our prep for the show and was like, Brian, I feel like might be a little more authorized for this topic, so we're going to move him up on the chain there. This is Brothers in Tech. Alan and Brian Jackson. We are real life brothers in tech. We pretty much do this podcast because this is all we really ever talk about. The two of us.
This is the only reason you and I would talk, really, isn't it?
This is it. Yeah. We share no other interest. I don't think. We're not always the biggest fans of the same movies. Yeah. We don't. I don't know if we listen to exactly the same music.
We don't cheer for the same teams.
No, we do not.
No.
But when it comes to technology, that is our common ground. That is our area where we are able to talk. So we're just letting everybody else in on our conversations about technology. Because I know there's a lot of people out there, Brian, and because I've still talked to people just about every day that are serving as that IT person for either their family, their group of friends, whatever it may be, just because they happen to know how to do something technology-wise, they become that person. Yep. Hey, I'm looking to buy a new computer. Who do I need to call? I'm going to call this person. So we want to be a resource. We're in that boat too. We get that. And we want to be a resource for everybody out there, either for those people that get called on for those questions to maybe arm them with even more information or knowledge. Or maybe you're that person making all those phone calls and you're thinking, you know what? I'm kind of bugging this person too much. I want to learn some of these things myself. So that's why we are here with this show and with Brothers in Tech.
That was a pretty good intro, Alan. Even though you're in the second chair now, that was pretty good. Yeah.
Good. I think there's added pressure. There's added pressure. I feel like I've got something to prove. So today's topic, Brian, we're going to talk about passwords, and this, as secret as they are, we are still going to talk about the idea of a password. For a couple reasons. A, is something you and I have been wanting to talk about for a while. We've kind of had batting around as a potential topic for a little while. And then there's been some I think every year there seems to be some evolution with what they're trying to do with passwords and how we can manage our passwords and security purposes. And just lo and behold, our last episode where we talked about announcements that Apple made at their Worldwide Developers Conference, one of the announcements that we didn't touch on was their next level version of passwords, or technically replacing passwords.
Yep.
So we're going to talk about that later in this conversation, but we thought it would be a good time to talk about different ways to manage passwords, because obviously, as everybody knows, login and passwords are the key to doing just about anything online these days. We have so many websites, so many services, so many streaming services, so many apps, subscriptions, everything else that requires a password, and it can be very overwhelming. Brian, I don't know if you've ever looked at your own internal list of saved passwords that are managed for you and how many there are.
Yeah, it's pretty scary. Yep.
It is.
Yep.
Yeah. To think that we used to have to memorize or find some way to write those down or keep them somewhere, maybe using the same password over and over again for different sites just because we remember it. Hackers are just way, way too productive these days. And even if you've got a great password, if you're using that same password on multiple sites,
right,
chances are pretty high it's going to get found out somehow or another.
And those things are starting to, systems are starting to notify you of that, which is kind of eye-opening, right? When you start to look at some of the password managers, or even kind of the built-in password control options that we'll talk about today, occasionally they're starting to notify you now. They're going, by the way, this password is being used, X number of times, or that this has already been compromised. That you need to change this. And I think we're realizing, for one, not to give away the entire, ending of the episode. I think we are getting to the point where passwords are going to go away eventually, but it's going to take a while for that to happen because, this is the new system, right? It used to be, okay, we needed a USB key, or we needed, an actual physical key, in order to get into a door. Well, now you can get in with your thumbprint. There's all evolutions of the security. And then, lo and behold, as you said, you develop a system you think is secure, and then the hackers find a way to make it not secure. And by the time they've found it not to be secure, now we're kind of behind the eight ball trying to figure out another way of doing it. So I think this is good for us to talk about because we are still in the password mode. We are still in that system where passwords are the thing, as you said. If you're not willing to create a password, well, you're not willing to get access to things. And they're going to make you have a password. So hopefully we'll give some advice today, or at least some options to be able to manage those passwords, given that we have so many of them now.
Well, and of course, I think the thing that's the most telling for so many of us is as we really sit back and think about our own personal use of passwords. I'm not going to out anybody on this, okay? But I know right at the top of my head, a large number of people I come into contact with on a very, very regular basis that keep their passwords still written down somewhere listed, somewhere very visible, and using the same password as much as they possibly can.
Yeah.
And again, I think that's worked for a lot of people in their mind anyway for many, many years. So people are kind of real hesitant to change and look at any other way to manage passwords. But as we alluded to, hackers and exploiters are just getting so much more creative and so much more productive on their end. It's really causing us to look at some different ways to elevate our game when it comes to managing passwords, in the sheer number as well. I mean, I can remember, Brian, when, years ago when we were really starting to get inundated with websites that we would have to log into and create accounts for. I did for a while. I got in the habit of just using the same password on every site. This was many, many years ago. And sure enough, I would come to that one website where it'd say, okay, enter in your password. Oh, and this password, you need to have 2 special characters. And my favorite stored used password only had 1 special character. So then I had to start creating a second version of my favorite password to use in these other sites. And it just exploded from there. So all of a sudden I'm like, wow, okay, now I get it. It's not even technically feasible in a lot of cases to use the same password in every site. B, it's definitely not encouraged or something you should do. So naturally, we've just been forced to look at how do we manage passwords? How do we manage all the passwords we have to keep up with? How can we do it easily? How can we do it where we don't have to memorize a lot of things, hopefully, in the future? Even though you're right, in the years to come, I think this is all going to be kind of a little bit of a moot point as we get to biometrics and other ways we're using to protect our identity online. But let's talk about these levels, Brian. I think we identified there's really 3 levels in our mind of password management. How do you keep track of, manage, and make the best security use of your passwords possible? And let's start at that bare bones level, like I just kind of described with people I know. That is this idea of, well, I just write the passwords down somewhere.
Yep.
Okay.
Hard copy.
So I have
somewhere.
A hard copy. I've got my list of websites, and I put my login and password in a book. And it's, there may be some people chuckling as they hear us describe this as an entry level, but rest assured, this is still what a lot of people are doing.
Yep.
Now, it may have gone to a digital note taking where, using like a note program in your computer to write them all down, whether it's a handwritten on your side of your computer or written into like a Word document or a notes document or something on your computer. It's the same idea. You are physically typing them in somewhere into a running list to keep up with your passwords. Yep. There are pros and cons with each of these levels, Brian. So what's the pros on doing the old-fashioned hard copy sticky notes on the side of your monitor or writing them down in a journal somewhere.
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, we'll laugh at it because we're digital people and tech people, but that person who does that knows exactly where they are, and they know who entered them, and they know that they're very unlikely to lose them. I have a family member who does that, and they have a password book, and they know it's on the shelf. You wouldn't know the book. Even if you looked at the row of books, you wouldn't know which one is the password. She has taken, certain pages in there and started to write over and over and over. But that's exactly where they are. And, and that person understands that every time I go and change a password, it tells me to change a password. I'm going to pull that book out. I'm going to scratch it out. I'm going to put the new one. Just like the address book. I mean, my wife is so much better at keeping track of, sending birthday wishes and all that stuff. I mean, Alan, you just had a birthday, right? You got a card from us, hopefully.
I did.
Hopefully you got it. Okay, good.
Mm-hmm.
So she's so much better at it, but she still has an actual address book. Mm-hmm. And to me, it's like, whoa, this is baffling, right? That you would have an actual address book. But she says, I know exactly where things are. I know when I update them. I know that things saved, right? There is no save function, right? I know that it's there. And I guess if you're the one managing it, if you're the only one accessing it, and you know where it is, that's some real pros, right? Is that it's there. It's not going to go anywhere. It's very, very hard to steal, right? I mean, just think about the comparison of the likelihood that a hacker is going to find your password on your computer versus a person coming into your house and stealing your password book off of a shelf.
Right.
Very unlikely. So I think that, when it comes to security, it really is a secure way of doing that. Especially if you take an extra step, and instead of saying this website has this username password, but if you have a way of having a code yourself of like, this is, I know what this means, and I know what email address this is, or I know part of the rest of it, those things. So I think they're, again, we laugh at it because I would never do it again. I've kind of gone beyond that, or at least I think I've gone beyond that. Hopefully I haven't regressed. But I think those are actual positives to doing that. Yeah. Now, of course, there's some obvious negatives, right?
Very obvious.
What's the negative? What's the negative?
Well, I mean, it is a physical list that you have to keep up with or have access to anytime you're on a computer. So this was maybe a little better method for people when you had a desktop computer at your home, right, and that was the only computer you had. Keep that journal list of passwords right next to the computer. Kind of makes sense. But now we're on our mobile devices. Now we're on sometimes multiple computers or tablets or other devices. Having that password list with you everywhere you go becomes very inconvenient or sometimes very difficult. There's nothing worse than saying, okay, well, all of my passwords are written in this journal somewhere, but that journal is not with me. And right, I now need to log into places. I'm now stuck. I have no way to get into those places. It is limited. I mean, it's prone to error. It is, you're really basically just writing down login and password, website address, right, without That's any other information to help you with managing them. I mean, let's be obvious with this. I mean, all these things are prone to damage or loss or misplacing or whatever it may be. Sticky notes I've seen on monitors, that's great, but what if that sticky note falls off and then all of a sudden you're gone and you have nothing to show up with it? So there's all these things that are obviously very kind of negatives about it. Now, even if you're someone that says, I'm still very, very bound on writing them down, I don't want to use a service to manage my passwords. Some people are still moving to doing it to an online, or not an online, but a digital list.
Yeah.
So you open up Microsoft Word, you open up a notes document, and that's where you save all your passwords. That makes a little more sense because it's always with you wherever your computer is and you have it accessible to you. But it's still putting it all in one place. The biggest downside for me, Brian, of doing the old-fashioned way, that hard copy or digital list that you manually create, is I just find it to be really slow to use. I mean, okay, every time you go to a website, you're now scanning that list of your passwords on your list and finding that website, typing in the login, and then typing in the password. And of course, remember, websites a lot of times will force you to reset your password every so often. So then you're going back to your journal. You're having to find your password, having to blank out the one from before, putting in a new one. It starts to become a little unwieldy. And I think there's be some real problems there. This was probably great when we had 5 websites that we visited on a regular basis. So it had passwords and it was easy to keep up with, but we're not there anymore. We are way past that.
Right.
So, there's a lot of cons to me, a lot more cons than there are pros on the more hard copy or digital list version of this. So,
Yep. Well, so then what's the next level? Right. So if that's the entry level, right, having to have one location, hard copy, manually kind of keeping it up. What's the next level?
So the next level is something that computer manufacturers, system developers really started rolling out many years ago. This idea of allowing you to type in a login and password on a website, but then save it into your computer, either browser or in your computer system. 2 kind of very prominent ways in my mind that I see these because we're Mac guys, we use Macs all the time. So the Apple operating system, especially its Safari browser, will allow you to save your login and password in a stored file on the computer. Now, this is nice because what this means is that when you go back to the website, you can have it prompt you to automatically fill in your login and password from that saved file. So you don't have to remember it. You really just know that, yes, this is where I've got it saved in my browser, or my computer system is storing this for me. That's good. There's some pros and cons here as well.
Yep.
But at least the one thing I will say was a little bit of a pro over the first level, how we're getting a little bit better with it, is you can have a very unique password very easily for every website or service you go to and not have to worry about remembering it, writing it down, keeping it logged anywhere else. So there's some pros there, but we're also going to talk about some cons with this idea as well. I'll admit, convenience wise, it's super convenient.
Incredibly.
Go to a website and you just say, okay, I'm logging into my Google account, and look, there's 3 different emails and passwords that I've had saved on Google, and I can just pull one of those up and it autofills the password in, and I'm on my way. It's convenient. It is inexpensive in that it's free. It's a free service that is built into the Mac OS or Google. Google Chrome browser will allow you to save your passwords. I believe other standard web browsers will do the same thing. And one thing that is nice also with, at least on the Mac side, I don't know if Google does this. I'm not sure if Windows does it, where if you did go to a website for the first time and you were putting in a brand new login and password, it could actually offer to generate for you a password that is a much, much more cryptic, longer password. The idea being that if it's going to save it for you, you don't have to remember it. So you can really make it as complex as possible. Takes a little bit of pressure off of you to have to make a password that's super secure, because this one will be very, very secure level, and you don't have to remember it. But Brian, there are some cons to this approach too, of letting the browser, letting the computer. I'm going to bring up an example of what I'm talking about. I realize that may be kind of hard for people who are not familiar or using this very often, what we're talking about. But this is the example from Google. If using Google Chrome in your settings, there is a place for autofill, and it will save your passwords if you choose for it to. If you type in a login and password at a prompt, it'll ask you, would you like to save this? And if you choose to save it, it will keep a running list in the background of all your logins and passwords. Now, these are at your fingertips to pull up anytime you go to a web page and go in with that. So this is what Google Chrome will do. I know, again, Microsoft Edge has some options like this. Mac has it on the Safari browser. So it's nice, it's convenient, it's simple. But Brian, what are the downsides for doing this kind of stored login passwords on the computer browser itself?
Well, I'd say the biggest fallback for me is, if I'm using Safari, let's say, and I'm using its built-in, password manager, then I go and use another computer. a non Mac computer. I don't have Safari, or maybe it has Safari, but it's certainly not tapping into my Safari and my preferences. And then all of a sudden, I'm losing the ability to access those. Right, so I get a little lazy, right, and that it's filling it in for me, and therefore I'm not really remembering the password. I'm not remembering why I set up the password for that particular site. So the ease of use can also lead to kind of complacency with your passwords. And then, of course, your passwords are being tied to a particular browser or a particular system. So it's fine if I'm on any of my Apple devices, because they're all of those passwords can get synced through iCloud or some sort of online storage. That means that whatever device that I have logged in, I should have access to those same passwords, right? If I choose to store them that way. And it also works, with something like Firefox or Chrome. As long as you're signed in on whatever computer, you sign in through the browser as you, and then it recognizes your passwords that you've saved through there. So I think there's some good things there, but the negatives obviously is that the additional layer of security really has been removed, or at least that it's one step closer to being accessible. Right. Mm-hmm. Now, I will say I'm still feeling fairly confident with security at that point. If the passwords are uniquely created, if nobody else has access to your computer, right? If you're not giving someone access to your computer, because of course, the ability to log into your computer, the ability to be able to, use biometrics. So I use biometrics to be able to access those passwords. I use my fingerprint to say, yes, this is me. Give me access to that password. So therefore, someone else has to have access to my either biometrics or the main password to get to my other passwords. And of course, that's the case with any password manager. If someone has your main password or your main biometrics, they can get access to any of your passwords, right? So I think that there's a layer there that may seem like it's a little less secure. And I agree that anytime I'm saving something to a browser, and especially just it kills me to save something to Google, who I know has access to so much about me, right? To say, by the way, here's my passwords. I do think that with as much as Google and Apple have put into security behind these password managers, these built-in elements, that I do feel fairly confident. I'm much more concerned about reused passwords and those being, gobbled up and understood and kind of saved by some other third party, realizing that I've reused a password so many times and then starts to pretend it's me. I'm much more worried about that than I am some of the saved passwords within the system and browser. But I could be naive. Alan, tell me your thoughts on it.
Well, I mean, there is some value to the idea that, I know there's not value. There's some concern to the concept of these are login and passwords that are still being stored inside your computer in a file. I mean, technically, even I know on the Mac, you can actually go to a program and view all the saved passwords and log in. So They're there and they are accessible. You're right. There are more layers than there have been before to get to that point. I have a thumbprint or finger or touch ID turned on my laptop that you have to have my master password or my fingerprint to get into my computer in the first place. Then if I were to go actually view my list of saved passwords in my browser, I've got to actually authenticate again. So it's adding some layers to it. I mean, it's still technically the information is still sitting on your computer. And there is an argument to be made that if it's sitting on your computer,
it can be
as an actual login and password, it's still accessible to somebody. So that's still a concern level, but I guarantee you this is where most people are right now. If I had to guess, I think this is where the minute your browser popped up and said, hey, would you like for us to save this password so you don't have to remember it next time? Most people clicked on yes with that. A lot of people I know, a lot of people I think make up a pretty good representation of the computing population are doing this. So there are some dangers. There are some concerns there. I feel like it's better security wise than having it just written on a notepad on your computer, because that is a truly open document. If somebody gets access to your computer, they can get to that document right away. These are a little bit hidden behind a couple more layers of security, but
Alan, you mentioned,
you balance the convenience with the security side.
yeah.
And I think we're getting a little better security. We're definitely getting a lot more convenient.
Well, and I think this is exactly why passwords are not going to be around
Yeah, I
for too
agree.
much longer,
Yeah.
is that there was password fatigue. Initially it was like, oh, thank goodness you're asking for a password. I feel so much more confident about you as an entity on the web because you're allowing me to have a password. So therefore I can make it secure. And then we get to the point where it's like, okay, now you need to remember 500 passwords. And by the way, they all need to be different, right? And if you reuse them, then you've got a problem. Well, there's a point in time where people realize, okay, now you're telling me I have to create passwords that is just getting ridiculous, right? And so they are reusing passwords or they're saving passwords in a different way. So when you get that option, hopefully, right, that layer of security is still somewhat there, that they're not, that they're not kind of throwing around the saving of these things and saying, oh, let me enter my password, without security to this particular website, which of course can then be nefarious about it. Alan, you mentioned so with Apple, they have the suggested password. So, okay, you're getting ready to create a password. Let us create a really, 26 characters or something. It's like let me create this key that is very hard, not impossible, but very hard for others to be able to tap into and guess, right? Do you use that? How often do you use that?
I have used it on a couple of occasions. Yes.
Okay. I have used it a couple as well, but it's not your standard, I'm assuming.
It's not, and for a real primary reason that I think we're going to talk about as a con with this approach too, is I use multiple web browsers in my daily computer life. I use different devices on my computing life. So to have all of my passwords created and saved on my Mac operating system is great. But the minute I have to hop onto a different device or even a different browser, like Google Chrome on my Mac will not use those saved login and passwords on my Mac system. That's when the problem comes in, because then I'm basically having to create two different lists of passwords based on what browser I'm in. And that's not a winnable situation. So
no, that's
I mean, granted, I know why Apple, Safari, or Chrome do these things. Then get you locked in on their browser and using their browser for login passwords. You come back to their browser. You're going to use their browser as much as you can because you don't want the inconvenience of having multiple login and passwords to keep up with. But again, for somebody like me, where I'm using both web browsers throughout the day, sometimes I'm on different devices, different computers. It's not a viable thing to have Apple create or have the system create these really long cryptic passwords that I'm never going to be able to document or remember. And I kind of have steered away from using the saved passwords for some of those same reasons. So there are still some cons with this approach. I think we're moving up the chain. We're getting a little better with it, but there's still some gaps there. It's the most convenient. It's the most accessible. It's the one that I guarantee you more people, as they power up their computer, default to and use nowadays than ever before, because it is super, super convenient. But there are some trade-offs there. They're getting you locked into their operating system. They're getting you locked into that browser, and they want you coming back to that browser every single time because your passwords are saved there for you.
Yeah. And honestly, if you've got a family member, we talked about the purpose of this podcast, but if you've got a family member that has the ability to be simple with their computing life, one computer and a phone, something like that, then I think these are great methods to use to say, well, let's get you on an ecosystem. Let's, every time it tells you to set up a password, set that password, right? Tell it to use the complex password, right? So that you at least are creating this layer of security, knowing that the only time that you are really doing computing is through one of these two devices, and those two devices are always going to have access to it. I think that is a really good method to have, and it's probably better than that same person going and writing them down, forgetting about updating one, having to reset passwords all the time. I mean, I think that to me is where the problems really get to be problematic, get to be interesting, is when someone says, oh, well, I forgot it, I have to reset it. And resetting it means now all of a sudden there's a layer in which you're either not going to remember it, or you've now had to enter it in multiple times. And, if people are really concerned about Big Brother on their computers, entering in the password, which potentially has the ability to be hacked, what you're entering into the computer, then I think that's problematic. So having something where this is creating it for you, but as we know, most people are not in that world. They're not in a one computer, one phone, or two device situation. They're in, they're as we are, where occasionally you're going to use someone else's computer, or occasionally you're going to use a shared computer and still need access to whether it's your bank account or whatever on some other platform. So, So let's talk about how do you get past all of these, Alan? What's the next step?
I think right now, before we talk about the future of passwords, I mean, if you're going to be managing traditional passwords and really looking to manage your password life, there are tools and services that have been around for a while now that really specialize in doing this. And they do alleviate a lot of the cons that we talked about with the other two levels of password management. And these are dedicated password management applications. So there are several vendors. We're going to spotlight a few of them, just kind of talk about. Their whole purpose is to create an application, a program for you, a system that you log into, where it will then become the source of saving logins and passwords for websites, services, and places you log into. It's all protected by a master password setup that you can also lock to biometrics like a thumb ID or touch ID to make sure you are able to get high level security on that master password. But that master password then unlocks all of your other passwords for other service you've saved on it. These apps are ones that will either run on your computer. Many of them allow you to install like little plugins on your web browser. So if you're using Safari, you're using Google Chrome, they will have a little icon that gets installed for this particular program. So if you come to a login or password prompt on a website, you can touch that little icon and it will then automatically populate with you as long as you've authenticated that you've logged into the service. It will drop in the right login and password for you. Now, already this sounds a lot like what we described on the previous level. There's a couple differences here, though. One is that these apps, if you get the really good ones and some of the ones we're going to talk about, they're cross-platform, meaning you can install them on various machines, various devices. They work between iPhone and iPads and Macs, Android and Windows. I mean, you can install them everywhere. So that way, every device that you work with on a regular basis can all be logged into the same account. And they're all pulling from that same master locked file of passwords that you've set up. And they can automatically generate or plug them in for you. So again, you're not having to type any logins or passwords, but you are having to log in and authenticate yourself on every device to use this particular app or service. Okay. So Ryan, let me show a couple of examples of what we're talking about here. I want to bring up a couple on the screen here for us. Let's see. I think I've got this. Here we go. So one of the ones in particular, 1Password. And that's the number 1password.com. Again, a very robust password manager. So it allows you to obviously log into all the websites with an automatically saved login and password. But it's not saving them in a accessible file on your computer. It is saving them in an encrypted file. And I think some of them even going cloud-based where it's encrypted and saved up in a cloud storage. So it's not just locally accessible. It's not something you could just go do a search on your computer and find the file where it's saving these. But the idea is that you can install it on your computer, you install it on your phone or your iPad. As long as you've logged in and authenticated on your different devices, then whenever you save a login and password from a website, it becomes accessible to all of the devices where you've installed this application. You can also, which is kind of nice, imagine, Brian, you're on a trip somewhere and you're going to be getting on a computer that's not yours, you've never used before. You're not going to be able to install 1Password on it as an application. But you can also log into a 1Password web portal and view your login and password. So at least you still have access to them and you can still take them and paste them into a website that you want to visit. So to know that it's accessible anywhere you go on any device is good. And security becomes pretty important for these companies because this is what they're designed for. I mean, designed to make sure everything stays as safe as possible. So this is 1Password, for example. I went ahead and installed it here. I've got it running on my computer just to show you what you're talking about. If you come to a page, this is a apple.com. If you're signing into their Apple store, I can click in here. And as you can see, it's got an icon now, a little 1Password icon where I can say I want to use that. And it's going to ask me, you don't see the prompt on the screen, but it's prompting me to use my touch ID to actually authenticate using 1Password. And when I do that, it now sees, I remember, and it sees my little drop down. It automatically gives me something I can fill in. So now when I go to the password side, it's going to also fill that in for me as well. So again, it's all doing it through authenticating with my finger, my touch ID here, if that's what I choose to use as my verification process. And everything's safe. So I'm doing this in Google Chrome. I could hop over to my Safari and do the same thing. And as long as I've got the actual plugins they give you installed on your different browsers, then you can use them in all different forms. It takes what we were describing before about saving it within the browser password manager and just broadens it out to a cross-platform across devices, but also higher level of security, and that these are encrypted files, in many cases stored up in a cloud that is bringing down and syncing with your computer, not as accessible for just somebody going through and hacking into your computer itself.
Yeah. And
Ryan,
not just cross-platform, but cross-browser, I think is really key.
Right. Very, very true.
That's a big one. Yeah. So you can go to Google Chrome and you can go to Firefox, and then within the same system, it's still tapping into the same password manager, and you can do that on multiple devices. So I think that's probably the number one reason to look for one of these. I mean, yes, increase security. I agree. I'm pretty sure it is doing that, but I also am pretty comfortable myself with Apple and their ability to kind of encrypt my information when it goes to iCloud and that sort of thing. But no, having the ability to go cross-browser, cross-platform, always have access, and as you said, their business is on security. So to me, when I'm looking for one of these, because I did have 1Password at one point, I went through and looked at several of these. Certainly, I would only use one that has been used a lot, and there's a lot of articles written about it, and there's a lot of people that have reviewed it, because for them to then have a password breach or a security breach is a huge, huge deal. And so and they know that their business is out of business if they have a big security breach. So when I know it's a company that's been around a while, that they're making their money off of being secure, which is what they do, then I get much more comfortable with it. But the ability to go cross-platform, the ability to go cross-browser, the ability to have other people that you share. Alan, you didn't mention one of the cool things about a lot of these is that you can then say, I'll give access to someone this particular password, right? It's like share that with them. Maybe I have this really long password and I can then share it with them, and maybe even have a way that it allows me to then go and change it right after the person's used it, or giving them some initial access. But I think there's a lot of cool features that could help to alleviate some of the stress behind passwords.
Yeah. So this is 1Password, the application. So again, these services are not only things you plug into your browser, so you can actually click a button and have it autofill for you, but you can also open up the actual application. For example, the 1Password application you get if you become a subscriber to their service. And this is where you can add new passwords manually if you just know some login and passwords that you want to go ahead and type in yourself. But as Brian was just saying, you've got some options. Like this is just a sample. I just put one up here as a demo. But I can actually go in and add to a favorites list and kind of create my own little favorite passwords that I'm commonly having to view or manage in a certain way. But I do have a share option, like you were talking about. If I want to share with somebody this particular login and password, I can do that. I can also have a private link that I can use as well to get right into this 1Password. Yeah. So I like all the ways you can organize it. It's a lot better than the Apple built-in management of your passwords. Favorites. Watchtower is nice, and that what it does is it's taking a look at every security issue out there going on with breaches, and it's comparing it against your safe set of passwords and letting you know if there's reuse passwords, if there's ones that just showed up on any kind of breach externally. It's going to flag those for you, give you an overall rating of how your overall password strength is, and really note for you those that are more suspect or possible ones for a breach.
Yep.
So it's nice to have a kind of a dedicated app that's really going to manage all this for you and notify you of everything that could be of a concern with your password management. So again, like you said, Apple, Google Chrome, some of these services do a little bit of that. I know Apple will notify me if I have a password that's being used too many times in too many places. I just feel like if you really want to take it to the right level, having an app that's really dedicated on doing nothing but managing this for you really makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
So.
And Alan, another cool part about, so when you go with a manager like this, obviously just saving your passwords is probably not enough to keep them in business, for them to say, hey, we're better than the thing that's already built into your computer that saves it for free. So a lot of these also provide some other benefits. You mentioned the audit kind of function where it can keep track of things, but also things like when I was using 1Pass before, I had copies of my social security card in there. I had copies of my driver's license in there. I had copies of lots of my passport in there. I wanted the ability to say, this is all the stuff I want secure, but I want access to them. I want to always have access to them at some point. And I don't want to just save them as a photo on my phone. I feel much more comfortable if it's being saved kind of in this locked feature. So, obviously credit card information, that's an obvious one. It's going to fill in. But a lot of those other things that, you don't think to yourself, oh, you know what, I have those in a lockbox and I only have access to them if I come home, and look in that safe. But now you can potentially save them behind a firewall as well, which is kind of nice.
Can I just say for the record too, this is one thing I believe is going to be rectified in the new Mac operating system. But right now, wireless routers, meaning your wireless networks, where if you log into a wireless network, let's say you have your home Wi-Fi network or a work one, and you have to have a password or a passcode to get into that Wi-Fi network, you can have it save on your phone where, if you're connecting your phone to it, it saves the password. But have you ever tried to actually get that password back out, like to see what the password was for that wireless network, Brian?
I don't know if I have. Yeah. I mean, I know where they are. I know where where it says this is a network that I remember. Yeah. But I don't know.
But if you actually go in and try to, you can't go back in and retrieve the password. So the problem there is, okay, well, I just had this happen today. I was setting up for an event at a place and had multiple devices. I was trying to get on the same Wi-Fi network, and I have it saved on one computer or one phone. And I'm trying to find the password because I want to get the other ones logged in that same network, and I can't get to it. So wireless routers is one of the options on 1Password and these other services to save as well. Now, I do believe the latest version of the Mac OS that's going to be coming out this fall. I do think that one of the things they said is that you would be able to actually see Wi-Fi passwords if you chose to, if you logged in authenticated. So that way it's accessible to you. But right now they're not, which I think is kind of interesting. So a lot of things you're saying that you can actually add into a company, into a program like 1Password outside of just purely login and passwords for websites, reward programs, passports, all those things.
Yeah. Right there. I was going to say bank account, right? Bank account's one of those that, I mean, there's a number of times that I need to know the bank account number. Either I'm making a call because something has happened and they need to know what's your account number or what's the last 4 digits of your account number or some of these things. And I may not be at home. The only place I really know how to get that is, in my statement that may have come printed a while back. I can go online, but a lot of them, even if I'm logged in, will hide the account number because they don't want that visible. So here's a great way to have all of that stuff that you potentially would want to store in a file cabinet, or you'd want to store in a safe. If you believe in this, and of course, given that these are things that you're going to be paying for, that they are known for security, I feel a little bit more comfortable about saying, now I have access to this. And more importantly, Alan, not only do I have access, but my spouse has access. And so this to me is one of the reasons I'm looking back at doing a password manager. I'm going to get a little, a little sad here for a second, but I just went to, a memorial service of a friend of mine that passed away. And I was helping to take care of his digital life. At the time he was, he had lots of technology, lots of logins, lots of things that, I was helping him work with, but I wasn't working with his wife. And now, he unexpectedly passed away. And I'm thinking, okay, you know what? If we would have had one of these managers to have everything listed in there, it would pretty much just be, here's the password to get in. Here's the biometric we're going to set up to make sure you have access to it. And now here you go, you're set, right? And of course you can do that. You can do that with documents. You can do that with Excel documents. You can print them out. You can have them in your safe. You can do those things. But the number of times we have to change them and how often and how diligent we're going to be about it, I'm much more comfortable, I think, going with one of these and then giving access to my wife and saying, listen, at least we now know that you're not going to get stuck one day not having access to these things, or I'm not going to get stuck if you go and you're adding logins, right? Because we have so many of those things. Even if I had to sit down right now and think about this process, if you had to sit down right now and make a physical list of all the accounts that you have, I'm not talking about money accounts. I'm saying all the accounts that someone might need to go and log into, all the bills, all the, the things you've set up accounts for, just random things. You'd be hard pressed to think of all of them. And, not only that, but finding the passwords, finding the latest logins.
It is something that
brutal.
Honestly, it worries me. I spend a lot of time thinking about. Every week I feel like I'm taking little steps towards trying to consolidate vital information into one place.
Yeah.
It's going to be a little more accessible. Honestly, I hadn't used 1Password. I know that's the app I was just showing. Haven't used it in a while. Pretty impressed with everything that they kind of have built in to store. Yeah. And it's got me thinking now that, I know we're talking passwords and that's what this whole show's about, but thinking about, beyond just passwords, but having one portal location to store everything critical in that situation that you needed to pass this on to somebody else and they need access to everything. How great would it be to just say, look, here's the access to my 1Password account. And in there you will find everything.
That
bank account information, any ID cards of mine, any credit card information, login and passwords to websites, everything is all right there in one spot. So here you go.
Yep.
It's nice.
And I would, and I'm super happy to say if biometrics is the main way of getting into that, giving 2 fingerprints, saying here, I'm going to let you have access to this, because this was the one challenge I had with password managers, Alan, and I'm sure you probably thought the same thing is, okay, so now you're saying all of these passwords that I've created, really there's one password that if someone gets that, I'm really screwed. Not just that, it's kind of like saying I have, if I spread all my credit cards out into multiple places, it's less likely that all of them will get lost. But if they're in one wallet and I lose that one wallet, I'm done, right? And that's kind of what this feels like. But at the same point, if you said I have access in so many ways to get to that wallet, even if I lose it, I have so much access to get there. Or if someone gets into that, there's a really quick way to turn it off. That's the other thing, right? Yeah,
that is. Yeah. That's the thing is if you find out for any reason that your main password account gets compromised, and they will notify you if a different device that they're not used to seeing has got access to your vault, your password vault, you can disable it. You can shut that down remotely. And plus, by default, right now they're all saying, using Touch ID or using biometrics as your way to authenticate. 1Password, for example, says, yes, you can turn on and say, I want to use Touch ID all the time to authenticate and to log me in. It still says that every 2 weeks, even if you have that turned on, it's still going to prompt you for the manual password. So it's got both going on. It's like every 2 weeks, at least you have to still type in the full password, but we're going to let you use biometrics to log in each time you want to access something.
So that's beneficial if I were to come and cut off your finger, I would only get access for 2 weeks with your finger, right? Before
you still
I'd
have to type in the password.
Yeah.
Or vice versa. You may know the password, but you don't have the finger. Well, you're not going to get terribly far.
Yep.
So it's good. I'm only apt on using these password manager programs if biometrics are included. if like some way of accessing it. If it's just all from a single password, which is what it was years ago and why I didn't really spend a lot of time on it, because before Touch ID was on laptops, touch authentication was on these laptops now. I really didn't like the idea of just keeping up with one typed in password to unlock all my passwords. I didn't feel like that was quite secure enough.
Yeah.
But now I do feel a little more secure with it.
Yeah. And I would say, given that there's one password and now you're saying I'm putting all my eggs into one basket, make that a really, really good password.
Yes.
Make that the one password that really is 26 characters. Maybe it's maybe it's all the letters to the words of your favorite song or lyrics, and you're including, dollar signs for every S and blah, 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 right? Whatever it is, but you only have to remember one. And you remember that one, and it's a long one, and one that no one else is really going to guess, or it's going to take an awful lot for someone to guess or tap into, and change it often, right? Since it's only one, change it every month.
Oh, sure.
Change it often, because that was the reason why people started screwing up with the passwords, because one, they didn't want to change them, and they didn't want to make hard ones because they wouldn't remember, and they wouldn't make a lot of them. Well, now this will make a lot of them, and this will force you to change it because it's only one, and it's only one to remember. So I think this is key, right?
Using a service like 1Password, another one is LastPass. Same idea. It works very similar.
Yep.
Another one that you were just telling me about, I'm not familiar with, but I was kind of anxious to check out, is Keeper.
Yeah.
Is another one. There are several. Again, like Brian said, I would only use ones that are pretty reputable.
Right.
Really read up on these and make sure that you're not getting some little fly-by-night operation to manage your passwords, because that could be a recipe for disaster.
Yeah.
Finding one that's got a very reputable, it's got a lot of good feedback, a lot of good reviews, a lot of good online review sources of it. And, they all do basically the same idea. They may have some little differences with the way they interact with you, or some of the organization options you have with your passwords. But the basic idea between all of these, 1Password, LastPass, Keeper, and so forth, is storing all of your passwords in one place where you don't have to remember them. You just have to remember your one master password and have your Touch ID or whatever other kind of measure of authentication to get to it.
Yeah.
And you can put these services on all your devices, have all your passwords available anywhere you're interacting with a computer device.
Yeah. And Alan, can I just make a recommendation of when you are looking for services like this, and not just with Password Manager? Of course, that's a really important one, but with any services these days, I have gotten the sense that if you're someone that says, type into Google, what's the best password manager, right? The very first thing that you're going to get is probably going to be a sponsored link that says, this one is the best password manager. And you don't realize that one's probably being sponsored by that particular company. So I always suggest at least, pick 5 websites that are independent of one another that are doing some sort of review. So here you go, right? The first few, when it says ad.
It says ad right there at the beginning. That is an ad. Just because they say 2022's best password manager, that's not an actual source saying that. That is the company themselves saying it, because that is an ad for their own product. So get past the ads. Yep. Then you start to get into, there's PC Magazine, best password managers of 2022. CNET, best password manager for 2022. Tom's Guide, Tech Radar. Yep. Those are the sources, you're right, you want to look for and really read up on and find the right ones.
And do multiple. Yeah. Pick 5 articles. Just do a quick scan. They'll all give their list. And if you find something that is being represented high in all of those lists, then it's going to be fairly reputable. But
I can already see.
Yeah.
Keeper is mentioned as the best for PC Magazine, as well as LastPass. 1Password is mentioned by CNET. Tom's Guide has LastPass, 1Password, Keeper as their 1, 2, and 3.
Dashlane's another good one. Mm-hmm.
Dashlane's good. So again, you're starting to see that, yes, even the 3 we're talking about and a few others are showing up on all these lists. So they are definitely ones to consider and see as viable options for you.
Yep.
So Brian, let's say we've just, and I've actually kind of convinced myself to dig back into some of these higher end password managers now, looking at some of the things you can do now. But this all may be for nothing before too long. Okay. As you mentioned at the top of the show, passwords could be, I think we're fairly certain of saying, are going to be going away at some point. We've already seen the need for specific passwords start to diminish with things like Touch ID and Face ID and other ways of authenticating yourself. If you think about it, for your phone, it used to be we had to type in a code to unlock it. Now, I guarantee none of us type in a code unless the phone's rebooted and we have to do it the first time or so. Everybody's using their finger or their face to unlock it. Those are biometrics, meaning they're using something on your body, some physical part of you to authenticate yourself. Apple, just in their last Worldwide Developers Conference, keynote, introduced that with the next version of their operating system, there's going to be a thing called passkeys. And the way they sold this, and again, this is not revolutionary. Other companies have been moving to this. But again, if Apple starts to build it in their system, it normally means there's enough momentum behind this idea to really propel it forward. But the idea of passkeys is that it will be using your biometrics exclusively to create and manage your accounts of places online. So in other words, there are no passwords. Everything is storing your biometric fingerprint, the face print data as a way of authenticating you to a website or service online. So there is no password. There's not anything to remember. Right now, when you use your Touch ID on a website, all it's doing is it's bringing up a stored password and passing that through to the website, filling it in. So there's still a password there. It's just you don't have to see it because you're automatically bypassing it and authenticating it with your fingerprint. Passkeys is looking to try to take that a step further and say there's no passwords at all. There's no password for anybody to crack. There's no hacker that can go and just try to spoof millions of variations of passwords to try to find yours. Everything is intrinsic data based off your biometrics that allows you to log into places. Brian, thoughts on this? I mean, this is the way things are going, right?
Yeah, no, I absolutely the way they're going. And I think they're going to continue to improve this. I mean, initially when Face ID came out, there were ways of spoofing the Face ID, and then it got better, right? It started to get depth camera so that it would recognize that, okay, this wasn't just a picture or wasn't just a mannequin version of your face, all of that, right? So it's getting better and better and better. And it's going to start to use things like retina scans. It's going to start to use, other ways in which you have unique identifiers about you. And Alan, let's also remind people, the whole reason things like two-factor authentication came out was that, passwords weren't enough, right? That people can steal the passwords, but if you log in with a password and then we also have to authenticate you a different way and send it to another device, at least it gives us a little bit more confidence. And now I think we're going to get to where maybe the two-factor authentication maybe comes from the pass key, right? I mean, I'm a little weary on, having a system that is totally different, right? This is, as you said, this is going to be something that all websites are going to have to get on board and say, let's build in a way for, our system to recognize biometrics, or our system to go to passkey in order to get the biometrics. Kind of like, Apple becomes the go-between on some of this. And that's going to take a lot of buy-in, and like a lot of, it's going to take companies, building that into their system, which is going to cost money, which some, companies are not going to do for a long time. But I could see the fact that two-factor authentication already being in place where they say, you know what, we already have two-factor, but if we can add this as a possible second factor, like the biometric from their phone or the biometric from their computer, I think that's going to be a first step of this, or at least a way in which that can be built in, eventually getting to the point that, those passwords go away. And it makes total sense, right? I mean, people could be saying, well, if I'm putting my fingerprint and it's sending my fingerprint data over to that company, what's to stop that company from having a digital version of my fingerprint that it can then use? But that's where you have to make sure that there's some sort of, encryption that you can be very comfortable with. And of course, Apple is one of those companies that, again, if they had a data breach or if they showed that there was a security breach, it would be a nightmare for that company because they, are preaching security and they are kind of, putting their flag in the ground about security. So I think this is fantastic. I mean, the fact that we were requiring people to remember things, and given that we had to remember so many things, people were getting lazy and not doing smart, techniques, and therefore becoming less secure. Again, that's what led to two-factor authentication. They said, well, let's just double it. Let's just make it two times, the password or the authentication. I think we're getting to the point where, let's get to some things that people can't replicate, and it really is you. And I think it's going to include lots of things, right? There's going to be voice and fingerprint, and there are all sorts of ways in which people can assure that it is you. And I think that's the key, right?
I agree with all that. A couple of caveats I see, or at least not caveats, but things that I think are going to have to be addressed at some point along with this. One, it looks like Apple's already addressing. Again, this is a page from their developer site, meaning this is very early notes on this technology. But it does appear that, like you said, websites are going to be required and services are going to be required to adopt this technology of passkey to allow this to be used to log into their site. But the good thing, at least on Apple's notes, I mean, how valid it is, we'll see, that they will work alongside passwords for a while too.
Yep.
So if you're a website that doesn't want to integrate passkeys using biometric data as your way of authenticating somebody, they will allow the passkey environment to basically still generate that password in the background and pass along to your website. You're still using your thumbprint, your face print, or other biometrics to log in, but it's still using the password in the background. Again, that's very similar to what we already have now, but it is saying that it can kind of work in tandem. So they are realizing that not every web developer is going to be able to move their site to allowing passkeys going forward, like from day one. It's going to take some time. The second thing I'm a little just questioning about, I love everything we're talking about. And I think from a security purpose, this is where we need to be. This is where we're going to be hopefully very soon. However, I have a Netflix password and I'm going to use passkey to automatically log into Netflix every time I want to watch Netflix. That's great. I happen to have a son in my house that also will use my same login and password. What happens there? Because all of a sudden, if we're now tying it to biometrics, or we're going to have to identify multiple people's biometrics that you want to combine into a single passkey, if you want to share your quote password with another family member, that becomes a question mark for me. Because as much as problematic as passwords are, one advantage is I can still write them down to someone and say,
you can share
hey,
them easy.
You need access to my account. Here is my login and password. There you go. And you got it.
Well,
biometrics then take that out of the equation, but it is something I think we're going to need to contend with. Maybe it's a family sharing type of situation where you can choose to have certain passkeys work across a family environment if you have other people registered as family members. I don't know. That'll be just something interesting. I'll be waiting to see what happens with that. But by all means, from a security purpose and where we need to be with passwords, this is definitely the right move to be taking. So
and and what Apple is doing, and I know Google is doing the same thing, and a lot of these bigger companies are trying to create their ecosystem where they're hitting these things from lots of different directions, right? I mean, Alan, I think I mentioned to you, I just for the first time the other day used the hide my email function, and I used it. I went to a restaurant where you had to digitally order, right? You had to do it on your phone. And it said, of course, here's, give me a phone number or give me an email address. And I was like, I'm not sure I want to give you an email address that then's going to start creating spam, because I've just noticed an increase of spam recently. I'm like, all right, well, let's try to hide my email because this is the one time I'm going to use it. So I don't need to remember it. And it was great, right? Mac creates its own version of an email that gets forwarded to your email. So that company only sees the spoof one, and then that one gets forwarded. So at least I could shut it off and say, yeah, get rid of that. And I don't lose, access.
It is great.
So I think that's great. But I think the whole idea of, okay, now the touch points that we've got to get rid of are sharing valuable information that can be misused and making sure we validate, right? So as long as there's a validation on one side that we trust, and if I make Apple be my go-between that says, listen, I'm going to validate to you, Apple, that this is me, right? This is me. And then if they have some way of creating either a temporary password that works for that account, or a version of the password that changes so that it continues to, authenticate. And that company says, listen, we'll allow 100 passwords to be you, but they're only ones that can come from Apple that have verified it's you. Whatever that is, whatever that gateway is, that's what we need to get past, right? We need to get it so that people can be confident going online, getting access to information, and assuring that that access doesn't cause a ripple effect of security concerns. And I think this is just another step in that way, which is great. So
I agree. Yeah. Completely agree. Yeah. That's great. And, we had a couple of comments too. I want to bring up talking about the pass keys, and I think Shane Flint had a great comment on this, just saying, and look, there's going to be initial bugs with anything new. He's exactly right. Every iteration of password management we've seen, there's been some quirks, there's been some things to work through, but he is right about this. The bounty, for hackers to actually go after and try to find ways to exploit this.
Yeah. It's going to be big.
It's going to elevate too. Yeah. So, because there again, if you could find a way to crack into biometric level data and find a way to replicate that, it does open up a lot more opportunities. It's a higher threshold. I think it's going to be much more difficult to do, but it's not going to deter hackers from trying to find some way to do it. I guaranteed.
Yeah.
So it's a good point. There's going to be some bugs, and there's going to be some. It still doesn't mean we can't. We got to still keep our guard on things. I don't think we can ever just assume that everything we do online is going to be safe and protected and nobody can ever get access to it. It's just what are these companies now doing to give us the highest level they can possibly give us that we all feel really comfortable with. And I like the evolutions that passwords have taken. We're still not there to that perfect nirvana yet, but I mean, I am happier with where we are now than we were 10 years ago for sure.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, that's Shane. Shane's always got some good comments. So,
Shane, if I remember correctly, Shane has some involvement in the security world. So I figured this topic might be.
Are you saying we shouldn't have shown his name just now? That we should have put an alias.
Yeah. So
sorry, Shane. Yep.
Shane's definitely more of an expert in that field. So we may have to do a follow up and see if Shane can come and join us and kind of fill in and especially correct us on anything we said wrong, because I'm sure there may be some of that. Yes. Shane said yes, heavily. He is heavily in the security arena. So
and his name is not Shane. That is a secure alias that he's created. Yeah. No, I think we're going in the right direction. Unfortunately, the balance between simplicity and security has always been at arms, at a head to each other. So I think we have to realize if we can get to things where things will still be easy but more secure, and that's where I think the biometrics is really coming in, is that it's going to be easy to put your finger up on the fingerprint reader. A lot easier than it is to try to remember something. And if we can make that secure, and if it means that eventually the hackers get into it, but yet we have to get 2- and 3-factor authentication. I mean, telling me to put my finger here and do a second finger and a third finger, that's still a whole lot easier than doing your password. Or look in the camera and do your finger, both together. Great. Right. I think that there's lots of ways we can go with that are a whole lot better than having to remember multiple things. So
anything with keystrokes, keystrokes can be tracked. Keystrokes can be monitored. Anything with having to type in a key, any combination of letters and numbers is still so susceptible right now. So the quicker we can get away from that, the better. I think our biggest takeaway from this is we do recommend having some form of management of your passwords, both from a security standpoint to make sure that they're not just easily accessible to anybody and everybody that could get onto your computer. If it means that you can have much, much more unique passwords for different websites by using a password manager type system where you have a one master password and it allows you to have very cryptic passwords for every single website you visit, that's kind of the best solution you've got right now, I feel like, in the password world for securing yourself, is very, very long, very obscure passwords for a unique one for each site you go to, all protected under a one master password account that is biometrically secured for you. I feel like that's probably about the holy grail for most common users right now until we get into the next level of password security or user security online.
Yeah.
So.
And Alan, one thing I wanted to mention, I feel like we should mention just to make sure people can see maybe the potential benefits. One additional benefit of using a password manager is a lot of these will have like family bundles, right? So where it's not just my wife and I, who I want her to have access to everything of mine, right? But I also potentially have the benefit of saying, well, let's have a family account, which could be a parent who, at some point, that you're going to need to have access to their accounts, right? And the ability to then say they have their own login, they have their own access. They don't share anything with you until it gets to a point where, there's going to be a need to share all of that. So I think that, there's lots of options of not just, hey, in my house, we're being secure, but potentially even, an extended family reason to do that, which I think is something that, Alan, you've talked about, was a digital legacy. Is that the term,
Yeah.
Of making sure that, when you pass on, that your information can be put in the right place for people to be able to get access. I think this is a great way to do that. So, yeah.
It's definitely a good tool to get working on that for sure. Yeah. Family management is great. A lot of these services we talked about have either individual plans or family plans. And the family plan means you can have multiple people that you as an administrator can choose what access each family member has to different types of passwords or forms or documents you may have secured there. And if you update a password on a service like a Netflix password, it's great because then everybody in your family that you have now shared this service with will get that new password the next time they log in, and they don't have to come asking you, hey, what's the new password, and get that updated on their own computer. They actually get it passed to them as long as they're logged in properly. So good. Yeah, it's great stuff. All right. Well, I'm definitely going to be digging a little bit more in a couple of these programs now that we've had this discussion.
Yep.
And unfortunately, our discussions, Brian, normally end up costing me a little bit more money every time we talk. So
yeah, we didn't talk about costs. These are going to require pay, but I will say they've gotten fairly affordable. $2 a month for a lot of them. Something like
I've seen
that
some of them, $2 to $4 a month.
Mm-hmm.
You can get a good individual personal plan to do this.
I think it's well worth it if you can use all of the features of it. Yep.
Although going back again, if you are a single computing device user or a single platform, let's say you're a Mac user and you use Safari, Apple Safari for all of your computing needs on your iPad, your phone, and your Mac, and all of your devices are Mac devices and they all use the same web browser, you can use the built-in functions of Password Manager, which is free, doesn't cost you anything. Just know that the minute you step outside of that Mac environment or Safari environment, you're not going to have access to those passwords, and that may or may not be an issue. So, So you definitely have some good options out there, I think. A lot of things to take care of your passwords. Just please be good using your security and your passwords and online. It's very important. All right, Brian. Well, if anybody's got some thoughts on this topic, password management, and just some different options and tools you've got available to do that, how can they share that information with us?
Yeah, they can send us an email at info@themesh.tv and info@themesh.tv. So, I would love to hear from people that have used other password managers. We mentioned having 1Pass or 1Password, LastPass. We mentioned Keeper, but I'd love to hear from some others that say this one was great and why, so that we could pass that along to our listeners. You could also go to the website, which is www.brothers-n-tech.com. And we'll start to provide a little bit more updates there, a little bit more regular on things that we hear from users. We can pass that along that way rather than waiting for an episode. So,
yeah, great. All right. Well, that is the end of our show today, Brian. As always, it's always fun.
Yeah.
Talking.
Well, tell the family I said hello. I mean, this will be the last time I talk to you until next week. So, all right.
Yeah, right. And even then, it's like the bare minimum text of, are we recording? Yes. What are we talking about? This. Okay. See you at 8:00. And
all right.
So yeah, we keep it pretty simple. All right, everybody.
All right, bro.
Thanks so much for watching or listening, and we will talk to you all next time. Take care.
Right. Bye-bye.
You've been listening to The Mesh, an online media network of shows and programs ranging from business to arts, sports to entertainment, music to community. All programs are available on the website as well as through iTunes and YouTube. Check us out online at themesh.tv. Discover other network shows and give us feedback on what you just heard.